Each class gave me a little pour into my cup of creativity, and a little bit more and a little bit more. And I would say that taking Fleur's class, because it opened something up in me, now I feel like my cup of creativity is overflowing. I wasn't growing creatively. I felt like I was just sort of doing what I saw everybody else doing. I couldn't feel any um, passion. And I wanted to find something that I would get up in the morning and say, it's time. I can't wait to get into the studio. I can't wait to sit down and work on something. Originally, I wanted to find a class that was going to be something beyond craft. And I didn't know what that was. I was new enough to art to know there was something more, but I didn't know what that was. I didn't think about elevating what I was creating. And so when I went looking around for classes, I didn't find a lot other than YouTube. And I didn't want a bunch of chatty stuff on YouTube. I wanted to go to the class and I wanted to learn whatever it was that I was there to learn in the class. So when I started watching the Friday feature artist things that Fiber Arts Take Two was doing, I was intrigued. And I loved the connection to the artist. And I felt like that was what I needed, is I needed to surround myself with artists that were doing what I could only dream about doing. They were in shows all over the place. They were in galleries. They were selling their work. And I wasn't there yet, but I wanted to be. And so I stepped through a variety of the classes at Fiber Arts Take Two because they all appealed to me. The nature classes, the collage classes, the dealing with eco-printing and fabric. And then Fleur's class, Stitch. By the time her first class was coming together, I knew at that time I was going to do something with a needle and thread. That was all I knew. But I was on the fence about whether or not I was going to sign up for her class for quite a while. If you are thinking about taking a course from Fiber Arts Take Two, I want to say first, I understand your hesitation. I was used to spending money to go to writers' conferences, but because I didn't feel like a professional artist, I didn't know if I was worth investing in the classes because it's a little scary sometimes to put that kind of money out there. I will say that I do not regret a single penny that I have paid for any of the classes. I have gotten something out of every one of them. And I want to go back to Fleur's class and say, I thought I knew embroidery, and I did. And I don't know that Fleur introduced me to any new stitches, but she introduced me to a new way of thinking about how I stitched. All of the teachers in the Fiber Arts Take Two classes have taught me a different way of looking at my art, at their art, and at the art of being a creative being. And that was absolutely priceless for me. The turning point for me in Fleur's course, absolutely without a doubt, was when she held up a skein of yarn and said, "Stitch with wool." And my mind was blown. I had been stitching with embroidery floss, and that was what I had remembered doing as a kid. And that was why I was kind of on the fence about signing up for the class in the first place, because embroidery floss was not fun for me. I am a texture fiend. I have got to use materials that feel good in my hands. So when Fleur said, try all the things, she says, I love to stitch with wool. And I'm like, whoa. So thanks to Fleur, I have a lot of wool. Fleur, her method of teaching and creating about finding joy in every stitch mirrored what I had been telling people around me for a long time, and nobody told me. It was like I needed Fleur to give me permission to really dive into the work of my heart. I started working on this piece in white, and the reason I chose to do it in white is because I didn't want to think about colors. I picked white to work on this piece, and honestly, it was, okay, these are the stitches I know. here are some things that I'm learning in Fleur's class. Here are some things I've seen some other people do, but nobody told me how to do them, so I kind of had to figure them out. And a lot of that piece got very textual because I was covering things up that I didn't like. I would do something that didn't make me happy, and so then I would stitch over it. And the way I would stitch over it usually was with French knots, because suddenly I was in love with French knots. I love looking at work with beautiful flowers. There are several artists I admire that do these big, beautiful paintings of flowers, Fleur's embroidery of flowers. I had zero desire to stitch a flower. But what I wanted to do is stitch something that when you ran your hands over it, you would do this. Fleur kept saying, play with fibers. Play with different fibers and find out what it is that you really like. That piece was sort of, that was my heart cracking open, because it was like all the things that I had learned in the previous classes came together, and all the things that I have been telling people in my creative groups about being true to yourself and creating the art that you really want to create, and don't worry what anybody else is going to judge you about. It all came together in that piece, which is why I called it Return to Joy. And then I got to where I was taking it off the hoop, and I didn't know what to do with it. It was flat, except for these little bumps where I had stitched over things that I didn't like. And I was like, and the exhibition was coming up, and I really wanted to be in that exhibition. I had not applied to any of the other exhibitions in any of the other classes that I had done, and this one mattered to me. And so I just started stuffing it with stuff, and then pulling my needle through it and shaping it, and it just created a life of its own. And I absolutely love that piece. I do not have it in my collection anymore. It sold as soon as I put it up, and the gal that I sold it to says that it reminds her to create with joy. And to me, that's the best gift that she could give back to me. The changes since going through some of the Fiber Arts Take Two classes that have happened to me, I think, it's sort of like, okay, when my kids were little, my son was in Little League, and we used to tell him that, it was really good to play the best team. And like, we don't want to play that team because they're so good and they beat us all the time. And we would tell them, you're going to play up to the level. And when you play the team that's worse than you are, you're going to play down to that level. And so I think that's kind of what's happened to me, is that I find myself thinking about myself differently and the way I present myself to the art world. And so now it's like, you are an artist. You are an artist. You've got the skills. You've got all these wonderful tools you've learned from these great classes, and you put them all into your toolbox, and then you dump them out on the studio floor, and you pick one up that excites you in the moment, and you go to work. I'm more confident about how I present myself in the world, and as a result, then people are noticing me and treating me as a professional, which kind of blows my mind in the best way, because if you act as if, then suddenly you become